of course, like anything that gets a lot of flack for being overpriced in the LEGO community, there's just as many, if not more, people out there buying that thing that's so overpriced and loving it and giving everybody else FOMO, right? And to remind listeners, when this thing came out, it was $180. It had 1,300 pieces, 1,343 pieces for that matter. So instantly, terrible set, terrible price to bar ratio, horrible. And then 16 minifigures. So I started to think, well, maybe the 16 minifigures piece is what's really driving up the price. Because West, how many sets have 16 minifigures?
Not a ton. And you're talking about which set again? The pinball machine or the
minifigure vending machine?
Okay, so that was the Lego Ideas set that just released last year.
Hello, bricks, chicks, and minifigures. You are listening to AFOLs Welcome, where we talk about all things LEGO from the perspective of two adult collectors. We're your co-host. I'm Grinch.
And I'm West.
And today we are taking a deep dive into the pricing or potential pricing of LEGO minifigures. But before we do that, West, let's banter over some bricks. How was your week?
Let's do it. Well, Grinch, my week was pretty busy. I was wrapping up some schoolwork, so I didn't have a ton of time for LEGO. Got a side project of combining two of the bamboo botanical sets into one giant shoot of bamboos. So that's going to be a side project for this weekend. But, after our conversation last week, and to remind our listeners, we were talking about the new Project Hail Mary set. And so I downloaded it onto my Kindle and I've started reading it. And as expected of any Andy Weir novel, it's a good one. So almost halfway done. It's hard to put down. I usually try to read myself to sleep at night, and I find myself staying up way later than I want to. So it's a fun one. It's an AFOLs Welcome recommend for Project Hail Mary.
Or just watch the movie. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, when it comes out, yes. Absolutely.
I feel like you're one of those readers, like for me, I'm like, I got to read a book. It's going to take me like a week. But I feel like you're one of those readers that's like, it'll take me one night.
No, not quite. But this one's a good one. It's easy to read.
Very good. Very good. Well, West. I feel like I've been saying this every week, but I did finish Mines of Moria. It's done. I rebuilt it twice, 3 times actually. I started my Dead Marshes mock. I am not doing the larger size. I'm doing the smaller size.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm constraining myself to a system and not just doing a larger size because more detail, more better, more bigger sort of thing. I know that's not proper grammar, but I wanted to make sure I was kind of challenging myself with the size and really saying, does this build warrant a larger size? For example, the size that I have for the smaller dioramas is just maybe 2 16 by 16 plates. Sometimes it's 3 8 by 16 plates, so a quarter of that size. The max I'll go is 5 8 by 16 plates. And so the other system or other diorama base is essentially a rounded base plate of 48 by 48. So I don't want to just be like, well, I'm just going to do that from now on. I want to make sure I'm using them strategically in ways that'll challenge me as a builder, but also fit the scene appropriately. So, for example, a Montaigne, I really wanted to build that kind of giant. I really wanted to build a Montaigne, right? The giant ruins there.
I mean, it's the hilltop, right?
Yeah, I could have just done a pillar, right, and maybe the eagle on a diorama. But I was like, no, I want to capture more of this because it's kind of such a large and epic scene. Same thing with Moria. I capture a lot of it, but not all
Yeah.
of it. And I could have just done a facade and a vignette. So I decided with the Dead Marshes that it really just needs to be a smaller scale diorama. So I'm doing that. I'm going to do another larger scale diorama too. Got all my space requested for Brickworld, and excited to move on. I had a hard time building Mines of Moria, not because it was technically hard. I just, for whatever reason, I think I've just been busy moving.
Yeah.
It's been a very busy time at work for me for the past 6 months. And so I've just not had the, I want to turn my brain off when I come home right now. I don't want I don't want to think, unfortunately. And so
Yeah.
been working on our new house and stuff like that too. But I've taken the weekend off. Not going to work on anything other than fun Valentine's Day stuff with the fam and then Lego. So I'm excited for that.
Nice. Well, I did want to add a point to consider is I think honestly for something like the Dead Marshes, you could probably stick to a 16 by 16 base plate and build from that. I think
I'm
you could
doing
probably
one 8 by 16 and one 16 by 16 because there's a very specific reason. But go ahead and I'll tell you why I'm doing it for this one specific reason.
Oh, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but I just, if you wanted to constrain yourself.
Legos, Ian.
Anyways, I think that would be an interesting challenge to see if you could do that in 16 by 16. I think you could, right? I think there's a lot of flexibility with something like the Dead Marsh that gives you the ability to do that. But I did want to add, you brought up Brickworld Chicago, and I did also want to add that Bricklink right now is open for Series 10 voting. We have something we'll talk about in Brickmail around that subject, but I was kind of perusing. I typically look for planes, trains, and automobiles, not necessarily in that order, and throw my thumbs up. So any sort of vehicles, ships, those kind of things, I'm always happy to support. And I've seen a lot of fun stuff. So far, that Series 10 looks to be like a good one. And if you're interested, you have the opportunity right now to go and nominate sets to be the next Bricklink Designer Program finalist. So
there you go. Good reminder. I for the diorama for Dead Marshes, I'm gonna build the diorama base up like 5 or 6 bricks.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
gonna open up a window on the side of it, like a little circular kind of diorama window, and capture the under the water. So it's going to be a 2-story. And I want, if I do a 16 by 16, that'll make it a circle. I just want it a little bit bigger there.
Yeah. No, that's
like a
fair.
little wall opening, right? Because so much of the importance of that scene is I was drawing it out when I was going to put it on the bigger base, and I was like, the important thing is the under the water aspect. And it's just kind of the dead shrub, right? Like that's what you, if you want to capture the feel of it, you could capture the sprawlingness of it too, but I think I can capture that with this way, right? With kind of getting that isolated, spooky feeling of under the water, and I could put some lights under there. And anyways, that's why I wanted to do it that way.
Yeah, I think that could be fun with some skeletons and stuff and armor pieces to give the skeletons kind of a look as if they're, former soldiers or whatever. I mean, that was always the interesting part about that sequence with the Dead Marsh is Frodo falls into the water and it doesn't look deep, and then I don't know, the movie sort of suggests
all of a sudden he's drowning in an ocean.
right. It's a little odd. So not necessarily odd, but right, like it's a little more magical, I guess, than what meets the eye, or more maybe spiritual, I suppose, than what occurred there. So anyways, yeah.
So that's the challenge I'm working on, and it should be exciting.
Nice.
But do you know what else is exciting?
I feel like at this point, I definitely do.
Exciting LEGO news. Well, why don't you run through whatever that may be?
All right, Grinch. So for this week's exciting Lego news, we pretty much just got reveals, which is fine with me. We're starting to get closer and closer to some of the interesting reveals I want to talk about. And I know closer and closer to some interesting reveals that you want to talk about. More information on the back burner this week kind of came out in the rumor space that I think is fascinating. But again, we will talk about that when it's formally
I have
revealed.
no idea what you're talking about.
But for this week, we got the formal reveal of the Lego Maersk dual fuel container ship, the Creator Ducks family gift with purchase, the Claude Monet bridge over a pond of water lilies, and the Lego Ideas floating sea otters. So, Grinch, of these reveals this week, anything stand out for you?
West. Of course. Of course. The Monet set.
Interesting. I didn't think you'd start there.
How do you feel about this technique? And for listeners who haven't seen the images yet, the Monet is very famous for his, what is it, Impressionism? I forget.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I took art history. I that's actually one of the only, sorry, not one of the only class I ever fell asleep in college, like non-ironically, was art history, because it was just not what I expected it to be. And that was my like wake up to college of like, oh crap.
I liked art history.
Literally looking at photos and talking about them for an hour and a half. Anyways, they tried something different. Specifically, they used bar pieces to kind of capture kind of that brush stroke paint blotch style of that Monet is very famous for. To me, this is one I have to see in person.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of the images, and while the main marketing image looks okay, I'd be curious to know, like, if you showed it to somebody, would they be able to identify it instantly? And my guess is you'd find some people that still couldn't identify it at some point. The bridge is fairly obvious, right? But if you don't know, you and I have the knowledge going into it that it is Monet, right? We know that is the bridge over the pond of water lilies. Like, we know what we're looking for, right? If you
I mean, it is
didn't
helpful
know
within the
that,
title.
well, right. But if I just showed it to you randomly on the street, would you know? Hey, what's this, right? Because does the mind kind of expect to see it, and then you see it and you're like, okay, cool, I got it. I'm just curious to see what it looks like in person with all those bars going up and down, because the image on the back of the box with the person putting it on the wall, it doesn't look great from that angle.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it. They've, in the press release, put it side by side with the actual painting. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to capture actually a really interesting technique that Monet did, which was he used the non-water lily covered sections of the pond to reflect the landscape around it. And so that's why you see the bars in the pond and like in the tree above it, because I believe there's supposed to be like a willow. They also have it in the actual environment, or maybe it looks like bamboo or something. I've actually been there many, many years ago in France, so that was kind of fun. Just, but anyways, I mean, I think it looks pretty faithful. It's cool to see them try something new. It's not really my cup of tea, but it looks nice.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it doesn't look bad. I'm just wondering, how will it look in person, number one. Number two, without having the source material there, would you kind of have the same feeling about what you're looking at? I don't know. It's one of those I just want to see in person before I fully judge it.
I think the thing that maybe is tricky with it is there's perspective and depth in the painting, because you're looking at a bridge
Yeah.
that is further away than where the observer is standing. And the problem with the set is that the bridge actually sticks out of the set. That's the kind of the first thing that came to my mind looking at it here. And so it makes it look like the bridge is closer rather than further away. And so I think that almost works against the set a little bit because, Monet is trying to create that sense of depth, whereas this now sort of reverses it, physically reverses it. And I think that might be to the detriment of the set. And I don't know how they could have fixed that because they still need the bridge there somewhere. But I do think that maybe is the shortcoming of the Lego medium of not being able to kind of capture that, or maybe some forced perspective on their bridge. I don't know how you could have done that, but might have helped make that. Maybe if they made it like a tad smaller or something to try to neutralize the fact that it's sticking up. But yeah, I guess that would be my one critique.
Also, price feels pretty bad on this one. I know it's got a great price to part ratio, Wes, but it's $250, and there's 3,179 pieces in it, but there are a lot of small pieces, a lot of which are the 2 long bars. There's a lot of the half round tiles, a lot of the flower tiles, a lot of the kind of smaller horn piece. It's a ton of small pieces actually. So I would have liked to see it closer to 200. 199 would have been good. I have a hard time defending or even justifying that price for that one, but that's just me.
Well, you know what does have a really solid price in the recent reveals, Grinch?
Ooh, the Creator Ducks.
Well, that was a gift with purchase, so maybe
It's
I suppose
free.
depending on
Yeah,
sort
that's a
of.
great
That might
price
be a
to
little more
ratio.
girl math
Free.
there. It's not really free because
No,
it's
that's
you're
called
paying
LEGO
the
math. Yeah,
AFOL math.
yeah, that's AFOL math.
Yeah, heard it here first, guys. No, I did want to talk about the Lego Maersk dual fuel reveal. So that was revealed, and we got some rumors that we were getting another Maersk container ship, which they've done a few of them now over the course of Lego's time. It's been a while since we got anything from Maersk, so that's kind of cool to see. I believe the last one I saw from, I think it was a New Elementary post, was 2014. So it's been at least over a decade. And we just
right.
we just got our new one. So it's a container ship. What makes this one interesting is it's dual fueled, so it uses 2 types of fuel on the container ship, ostensibly to help improve the environmental impact of shipping. Ironically, shipping is one of the dirtiest forms of commercial cargo movement in the world. So there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that come from shipping and stuff like that. The crude oil that they put in those tankers to feed their engines is pretty dirty. But so there's a lot of work that can be done on that, and it's cool to see not only Maersk doing that for real, but we also get a really cool boat at a size and scale we don't normally get. I've seen 2 things sort of stood out in the discussion about it. One is I think it's not actually in Maersk Blue, so kind of an interesting thing there.
I was looking at that too, and I don't think it is as well.
That is a conclusion. I believe from New Elementary, who said that they're not technically in Maersk Blue, which was a Lego color, is a Lego color. So it's funny that it's also trademarked by Maersk. So that shade of blue, but it has carried over into the Lego world, and unfortunately, we don't get anything in that for this go around. But
it looks like it's azure or something, because the Maersk blue is closer to the medium blue color, and this is closer to medium azure.
Yep. Yeah, I think that is a correct assessment there, Grinch. I think it looks fantastic. I have one complaint, which is it's all stickers, it looks like, which is a bit of a bummer for a set that is $150 and kind of a once in a generation set to get all of these stickered items for the control, the conning tower, the command tower structure, the bridge, and the Maersk logos and stuff is just kind of disappointing. So that being said, I still think it looks fantastic. I used to live in a port town with big container ships that would come in and out of the port, and to see them as like a just being in our car and seeing one drive past, or I guess motor past. They don't sail past, right? But boat past was just so. I mean, they're so big. So these ships are just gigantic, and to see them, portrayed in Lego scale is just really fun. So I don't think I'm going to get it, but it's one that I'm just really excited for, and I'm happy to see Lego kind of exploring that dynamic. On another aside, they're actually looking at bringing sails back to boats, especially these big container ships. Ironically, they're modern sails, and they're actually more like wings than they are sails. But they're looking to bring those back to help reduce basically how much they have to, use their engines. And it's kind of fascinating to see this technology from 2 centuries ago, really, at this point, century and a half ago, that finally kind of was phased out, potentially being brought back in a more modern way. So, anyways.
This is a set, and I feel like I say this often, but it's a set I'd really like a peek behind the curtain because it's a return after 12 years of partnership, right, with Maersk. And Maersk has, I want to be careful with what I say because I don't want to get political, but Maersk was put under a lot of pressure by the mask off Maersk movement to cease transporting goods to Israel, including weapons, right? And I'm not familiar enough with the movement to talk on it or even portray myself as knowledgeable on the matter. But in 2025, they did cease that. They responded to this movement. That's all I know. And I'm curious. 2025 was 2 months ago. We've talked that we suspect, anyways, Lego has a 3-year-ish production cycle. I don't think they turned this thing around in July of 2025. So I'm curious, why Maersk? Why now? Was this thing shelved for a bit, maybe a year or two? We got a Endurance in 2024. We did not get a ship last year,
Oh, we
right?
got
In 25.
the Black Pearl, right?
Yeah, but I guess I was thinking more of a realistic ship. But you're right, we did get the Black Pearl. But we got it in November
Yeah.
or October. So I'm probably looking into that too much. I'm just curious. I'd love a peek behind the curtain. Was this planned the whole time and this was going to ship in March either way, sort of thing? Or did Lego shelf this one for a little bit because they didn't want to
Ship
be
in
so.
March.
Wow. Did this get
Nailed
stuck
it.
out into sea for a while? No idea. But
Yeah. I think you're
curious
probably
kind of what happened here.
maybe, I think they're more correlated than they are, you know, causatory. Is that the correct way to say that?
More correlated than they are. Yeah.
Well, there's more
causatory.
correlation than there is causation, but
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, I don't think, in fact, I would imagine Lego, and this is a strong imagine, would imagine Lego's corporate ethics probably align more or are sympathetic to things like the mask off movement than not. At the same time, Maersk is, I believe it is a Danish company. And so I imagine, we've seen a strong partnership between Lego and Maersk over the years. So I don't know if they, and Maersk themselves are just a shipping, I mean, unless they're shipping blatantly illegal things, like it's just the business.
And Iron Man just produced weapons. I don't know.
But my point is, right, that like I don't think Lego would necessarily delay or punish the Maersk line because of perceived controversy. I think if Maersk maybe became the sole supplier of Israeli weapons, and maybe that might cause some concerns. But again, I go back to our most recent case of the Osprey being pulled, and
They've
so
certainly canceled less for.
yes, absolutely.
And Maersk is a Danish company, so maybe they had some sort of insider communicate. I know, don't worry, we're going to respond. It's going to be public, and then we're going to come out of this
Yeah,
Lego set and be in some good graces. I don't know. I don't know if we have to noodle on it for too much longer. I'm just kind of
sure.
causation, correlation, or coincidence. Maybe we'll know in 10 years. Maybe we won't.
Yeah. Anyways, it's a fun looking set. I think it's neat when they build these big container ships, and it's a modern container ship. I think, anyone can marvel at the size of these things. And I think we can both agree we'd like to see more ships and Boats in Lego's future. So anytime we get a Lego Boat, it's pretty exciting.
I'm sorry, are you purposely doing that, or is that what the kids are doing these days?
It's definitely not what the kids are doing these days, but it's
Is this a reference for MASH?
It's not a reference for MASH, no.
Okay, Hawkeye. All right.
The floating sea otters. Grinch. Thoughts?
You could have been buying me this set, sir.
You could have been buying me this set because I said the animals. You said you need to pick one.
You stole mine.
I said the whale, but
because you stole mine.
In the earlier session, I called out the sea otters specifically. So I'm not.
There's a
I
lesson
don't think
about
I'm
stealing
wrong.
people's things, West.
I see.
Why do you think it has 1,234 pieces? Like, that cannot be a coincidence. Do you think it was at 1, 2, 3, 5, and they're like, no, get that down to 4, and you get a bonus?
Remember we were talking about like the whole Maersk thing? Like, I feel like this is definitely coincidental, not
educated conversation. Dude, they do stuff like this on purpose all the time.
Well, I'm not sure, and I don't know if there's any sort of rationality. Maybe they're doing it for fun, but who knows? I will say I do really like the set. Otters are one of those animals that appear globally, which is kind of cool. Specifically, I mean, there's obviously freshwater otters, but there's sea otters all over the place. In fact, close to home, I saw an interesting reel on Instagram about a few months ago about Baltimore's Inner Harbor getting otters back for the first time in recent years, because it's in some sections of it really cleaned up, and so that's allowed otters to return to that area, which is awesome. They're just cute. They make little squeaks. I mean, how can you not like otters? I think they were the oxalotls, right? Is that the correct word? I don't remember. The little salamanders.
Yeah, with the lungs on their outside of their body.
Yeah, they were those before they were a thing, right? Otters, I think, are always cute and adorable, and I think that's something that, like, ironically, everyone around the world can agree upon. So, how can you not like them?
I mean, yeah, they're great.
They float on their tummies and they eat mollusks all day, right? They just have seafood buffets. That sounds wonderful.
I'm still kind of holding on to this idea that, otters have one heart, 2 paws, so they're adorable, right? They can hold 3 pebbles at once and juggle them, and they float in clusters of 4 so that they don't drift apart. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4. Dude, the message is right there.
Yeah, Lego subliminal messaging. It's psychological warfare at its finest.
Yeah. They're brainwashing us, bro.
Yeah.
Otter cute.
We didn't put our tinfoil hats on before we started the episode.
No, I intentionally left mine off. I think it's cute. I feel like the idea submission was a little better, but I don't know why. Yeah. Just a little bit cleaner. But
I don't remember if the ideas one included a baby otter, but there are versions. I didn't
remember either.
So you can have it on its back with no baby otter on it, or you can put a baby otter on its tummy. So it's like a mom otter with their baby otter, and double the cuteness there. But
Max out the cuteness.
there you go.
So I take that back. This one is much better than the idea set. Not that the idea set's bad. And actually, the designer included a really cool sketch of how they did it. But it's definitely more of a complete model with the story, right? That you kind of commonly see Lego go for. There's stuff that I like about the original submission better, including the fur, but there's no baby on it, right? And this definitely feels like let's bulk this bad boy up a little bit and get this thing over $120. Whereas the submission, what I do like about it is it's much more simplified. It's much more slim back. So on one end, yes, it does look much more polished, much more like a fine otter piece, but it's also, I assume, using 2 or even 3 times the amount of pieces.
Yeah.
Well, West, shall we move over to today's topic?
Let's do it.
Today's topic. Are you ready? All right. So on that note, today we are talking about Lego and money and prices and value and minifigures, as we have talked about often and kind of come back to every once in a while. And today we have, or I should say, I have a little bit of a different take on the argument, and I purposely have kind of left West in the dark here because I'm going to try to sell West on this thing, and hopefully I can convince you that yes, while we've talked about how Lego's not necessarily getting more expensive on a per part basis, and they're coming out with more and more larger and expensive sets from a retail price standpoint, the value for the brick is about the same. And I'd like to argue that one area where that may not be true is minifigures. But before I do that, Wes, can you recap kind of your feeling on Lego price to kind of maybe catch up some of the listeners that haven't listened to our very first episode and then a couple of the other episodes that we did last year?
Well, we do talk about price per part a lot, Grinch. So just to kind of recap our discussions, over the last few years, we've been taking Lego, our data from sites like Brickset, Brick Economy, for example, and we've been able to go through and perform price by part analysis on the entire catalog for that year. Now, we do isolate certain themes and sets, specifically things like Duplo, some of the, for example, the keychains. Anything that Lego produces and sells at the Lego store is technically a Lego set in the eyes of this data. And so there are, the plastic mugs that you can buy, for example. Those throw off a lot of this because those mugs are going to show up as one part with a $5 price. So a terrible ratio there, right? Theoretically. So we isolate that, we kind of slim the data down, and we kind of stick to core Lego sets. And the data has shown fairly consistently over the last few years, like you mentioned, a very stable price to part ratio. And so when people say, well, it feels like Lego is getting more expensive today, we can sit there and say, actually, the data shows that the average price for a brick is not really changing at all. But what is changing, and you mentioned this, and we have data to show this as well, is that we are getting more and more expensive sets. And so when we look back at waves from like the early 2000s, for example, the late 90s, you usually had a bunch of sets in that $20 to $30 range, maybe 3 or 4 sets somewhere between $30 and $50 or $60, and then maybe 1 to 2 sets in that high 80s, 90s, $100 range. And that was about it. So like for example, the Western series of sets is a really great example for this. Fort Legoredo was the large set in that wave. I think that one was only like $80 if I'm not mistaken at retail. It wasn't super expensive. It was the largest set, and that was it. There wasn't a Star Wars summer wave like we got last year, where we had two $180, $170 sets between the turbo tank and the MTT. And so we're seeing just more of these sets in these waves releasing at higher price points. Additionally, Lego Icons and the creation of that wave has really skewed this data in a powerful way, because now we're seeing things like $700, $800, $900 sets potentially that are being released throughout the year that we just never had before. And so Lego is getting more expensive because Lego is getting bigger, not because the Lego piece is necessarily getting more expensive. And that's my 2-minute or so summary of where we're at. Back to you, Grinch.
So I've gone on a journey, and it's interesting how my thought process has kind of come full circle on this journey as well. And I want to take a step back and remind listeners of a set, the minifigure vending machine that came out towards the end of last year. Well, I guess it was kind of middle of the year. I digress. Back then, I had kind of brainstormed this thought that part of the thing that could be driving up price to part ratio was minifigures, and how Lego was valuing them differently over time. And part of my fear was, as Lego has kind of gotten more entrenched in the AFOL space, they've purchased stuff like Bricklink. And we talked about how, hey, that's going to be such a giant collection of data for them. But what can you buy on Bricklink? Minifigures.
Yeah.
Right? And if they're making 3% on somebody selling a Boba Fett for $100, I think they're probably sitting there saying, hey, we're maybe valuing this thing at around $2 internally, but we could probably go closer to $5 if this many people are willing to spend $100 on one minifigure, right? Now, you can't get too carried away with that, but I think everybody would agree, most people would agree that minifigures are cool, right? I would argue that in today's day and age, I think the Lego sets are also just as cool, if not cooler, but that's a story for
Yeah.
today.
It also stands to reason that if Lego bought Bricklink, they're going to use that data to inform plans for the future, for example, how they value things. That's just reality. I mean, I think if anybody says, no, there's no way that they're using that to inform the pricing of their sets or demand, I think you're maybe a little naive, to be frank, which is okay. But why else would they buy something like Bricklink if they weren't looking to get the data that Bricklink provides? Because, like you mentioned, there is a fee that they get on every sale. That certainly could be part of the equation, right? I mean, people are making money off of Lego in the secondhand market. Let's just buy the website where they buy and trade Lego on the secondhand market, and then we can make money off of already sold sets. There's something to that. But there's also something to the fact that Lego now has immediate information about what is the most expensive Lego piece or scarce Lego piece out there, and can do things like flood the market with newer versions of that piece when they feel like it. And they've done this in the past. A great example is the modular building from this year reintroduced sand green pieces that made the Green Grocer set so expensive. And now we have them out in a modular. Not only in the modular, but they've gone, I'm sure they'll find their way, if they haven't already, to the Pick-a-Brick wall, the digital one. And so now the value of the Green Grocer on the secondhand market, I'm sure, is going to start to deflate a little bit, because those pieces just aren't as expensive as they once were, or exclusive, or scarce. But anyways, Grinch, I am also digressing. You were mentioning how this affects the price of the minifigure, and you have a theory about that.
Initially, I thought it was fairly obvious just to look at something like CMF, right? It's a minifigure. You can look at the price over time and you can see it started at $1.99 for series 1 and 2. That was back in 2010. Series 3 to 11, 2011 to 2014. It went to $2.99. Series 12 to 19, 2014 to 2019, it went to $3.99. And then every subsequent series since 2019 has been $4.99. Right? Hey, fairly obvious. Hey, the price of the minifigure went from $2 from 2010 to $5 in 2019. What's interesting is from 2019 to 2025, that's 6 years. So you could say we're due for an increase, number one. We haven't really gotten that, but I'd also say that a CMF series has kind of lost a little bit of its spunk over the last few years. It's just kind of, you're on what, series 30 practically now. It's like inherently when they come out with Call of Duty 18, you're kind of
Yeah.
great, cool, awesome.
Modern Warfare Redo Part 2.
Redo Part 2, Part 5, 2037.
Yeah.
So, maybe as people have kind of stopped focusing on CMFs, the price is kind of just, hey, we got to keep it a little bit more competitive. We can't drive. People aren't buying these in such high demand. Therefore, we can't move the price as much as we could have. And I'll come back to this. I just wanted to lay that out. That's the simplest, most easy explanation. Initially, I think those numbers would be a little bit off, though, because, like a CMF, they're just buying the CMF, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of the CMF is to have maybe an exclusive accessory, a printed arm, right? Printed legs, a unique face print, a unique everything should be semi-unique with them, right? Or that's your expectation. May not always come to
Absolutely.
fruition, but that's your expectation. Therefore, it's a little bit more of an expensive minifigure to produce. I had heard at some point that they were co-manufactured, so essentially Lego doesn't even produce them. They're produced at a separate factory that could add to cost, just like they did with base plates. They just stamped the Lego logo on there. When you're selling something individually like that, you kind of lose some of those benefits of an economy of scale, because if it's only produced in one factory, you have specialized pieces, etc. It's more expensive to make. That's what I'm trying to say. And then you're putting them into an individually wrapped bag, so it's more expensive to sell an individual unit, etc., etc. But I'm going to come back to that. So the pinball machine, not the pinball machine, I'm sorry, the minifigure vending machine kind of inspired this thought. And
Okay.
of course, like anything that gets a lot of flack for being overpriced in the Lego community, there's just as many, if not more, people out there buying that thing that's so overpriced and loving it and giving everybody else FOMO, right? And to remind listeners, when this thing came out, it was $180. It had 1,300 pieces, 1,343 pieces for that matter. So instantly, terrible set, terrible price to par ratio, horrible. And then 16 minifigures. So I started to think, well, maybe the 16 minifigures piece is what's really driving up the price. Because West, how many sets have 16 minifigures? Not a lot.
Not a ton. And you're talking about which set again? The pinball machine or the
minifigure vending machine?
Okay, so that was the Lego Ideas set that just released last year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so I did some mental math, right? I'm like, if I told myself it was $5 a minifigure, right? That would mean with 16 minifigures, $80 worth of minifigures in this set, and you're looking at a price of $100. You say a minifigure has about 7 pieces per minifigure. I'll give them 10, right? Just to do some simple math. It's 160 pieces going to those minifigures. Remove the minifigures, remove $80, 160 pieces. You're left with 1,100 pieces, 1,180 pieces, and $100. And that feels much better, doesn't it? That's, oh my gosh, that's 9 cents per part. That
Yeah.
feels great.
Yeah.
Yay. That's where we want to be. All of a sudden, this is the greatest set ever. So I thought, what if part of the feeling of Lego getting more expensive is that in some cases we may be getting more minifigures, which the data says is not necessarily true. So what if, though, Lego was valuing that individual minifigure in a set differently? And I started with $5 because guess what? The CMFs minifigures are valued at $5. So
Mm-hmm.
there we go, $5. And what's your initial thought on that? Am I crazy?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. My initial criticism of the vending machine discussion is that there's a lot of new stuff there. So we have to be able to separate and isolate this $5 thesis hypothesis away from the fact that this set also had those new ball pieces that came out that were brand new molds. It had new printing for a lot of the minifigures. That was important. Although I'm sure cost wise is ultimately not fairly negligible. Although we have to acknowledge that, remember, for the listeners, Lego has only so many pieces they can make every year. So if they're introducing a new printed piece, it's coming at the expense of another printed piece. So there is a cost associated with printing other than just the ink or the paint, rather. And so it's not necessarily negligible, but at the same time, probably doesn't add to monetary costs per se. It's more of like a engineering scalability cost, if anything. Penalty maybe is a better word for it. But when you compare, so again, we talk about the vending machine. I don't know if we can necessarily separate out all of that. And what I like about your argument so far, your line of reasoning, is you went to find something else to compare that to. And you looked at the CMFs. Now, the CMFs, again, are inherently collectible. They're scarce. They're unique. So as far as minifigures go, they should be probably on the more expensive side of things. But at the same time, too, they're done at such a mass and scale. It's not going to be a Galen Urso from the latest Death Star set, for example, where that's the only one we've ever gotten at a very high price point. So, anyways, point I'm getting at is so far I'm fully following your logic, and I appreciate you sort of stress testing the theory with other benchmarks surrounding it.
So let's say instead of 5, we use 4. $64 for minifigures in this set, right? So I think we could kind of come up with the idea of, somewhere between $4 and $5. And
Sure.
to your point, to compound on that point, we got a classic space minifigure in a new color, which is usually very sought after, right? And Lego has not shied away from necessarily knowing that. We got a couple of new castle type factions with some new prints, right? And the griffins as well, right? But we got duplicates of all the minifigures. So maybe that helped keep the cost down. So I'm glad we're on the same page, because guess what? Here at AFOLs Welcome, we like to get data. And so I got some data. And I looked at all of 2025. But we didn't stop there. So removing Duplo. I even removed CMF just because it's a $5 set. And depending on the year, sometimes they count as one piece, sometimes they count as multiple. It's just cleaner, easier to remove it.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of not the point of this exercise. The point is to look at system sets and priced apart. So I did that for 2025. After that cleanup, if you would, removing of the gear, Duplo, etc., there's 461 sets. 146 of those sets did not have minifigures and averaged a piece count of 783 pieces, with an average retail of just under $74. So, priced apart, 8.9 cents per piece.
For the non-minifigure
minifigure sets.
Copy.
I could sit here and I could go, well, minifigures with 1, 2, 3, 4 minifigures in a set, 5 mini. I could do that, but I'll spare the listeners some boredom. The average price to part ratio, which in every single tier of minifigures, so a set with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 40 in the case of the Death Star. Every single case, it was significantly more than the non, which you'd expect. In one case with 18 minifigures, which is one set, so it's a poor sample size. Obviously, sample size 1 is not a good sample size. It was the same. Just one. One case, it was the same. Every other case, it was at least 2, if not 3 cents more.
Do you remember
On
what
average,
that was?
No, I do not, but we can find it. On average, the price to part ratio was 11 cents and 7/10 of a penny. The difference of 3 cents per part.
Yeah.
Now, that may not sound like a lot, right?
But you're talking about 460 watt sets, right? That probably have.
Well, when you're talking about 700 pieces,
Yeah.
it is a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I did is I took the average price to part ratio for a set with a minifigure versus without, that difference, and I applied that price to part to the average pieces of sets without minifigures, again, which was 783. So I said, if those sets were priced at the same price to part ratio as sets with minifigures, what would that price be? And it went from $74 to $92. So that 3 cents per part made a difference of $17.72 to be exact.
I'm seeing where this might be going.
And then I said, well, what was the average minifigure count for sets with minifigures? And I said, that's dumb. I can't do that because that's just averaging the numbers. I weighted the average. So obviously a set with, because I'm doing this all off a pivot, right? Anyways, it's been done. It's been done correctly is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
3.9.
Okay.
Mr. West, if you take 17.72 and you divide it by 3.9, what number do you get?
I have no idea.
$4.45.
There you go.
Simply put, $4.50. And we said in our hypothesis, using the minifigure machine, the minifigure vending machine, as a case study, that we kind of determined that it would be somewhere between $4 and $5.
Yeah.
Which is $4.50.
It's interesting that you went about it that way, because as you were describing it, again, I think this was a very smart thing to do by separating the non-minifigure sets from the minifigured sets. I think I would have approached it by taking and creating just a simple function in Excel saying, if I have one minifigure and I'm assuming the price is $5, remove $5 for every minifigure. I'd go and adjust all the prices for every set using, a Excel function. And then I would just now have non-minifigured sets and adjusted sets to be priced without minifigures, and then seeing if those averages were similar. I'd be curious to see if that returns similar results. I'm sure it does, but that would be how I approached it. I liked the way you approached it. It totally made sense. That was exactly where I was kind of like, I see where you're going with this. So $4.50 for a minifigure. Yeah.
To answer your question, that set with the 18 minifigures was the Siege encampment from the Bricklink design program. So,
and I those sets, I think are. It's not to say that they skew the data, right? But we know that they have to use stuff that is currently in stock and available. And so any minifigure that they put in there has either already been created by LEGO or is in that production pipeline. So theoretically, it's not a novel figure. And so I would actually probably assume in that case that it's probably worth, those minifigures are not as expensive which is why it probably returned a very similar price per part ratio as a non-minifigure set. That would be my take, but that is way outside of the discussion. So, Grinch, what is the implication of a $4.50 minifigure?
Well, let's pause for a second. I wanted to. So we have two points now, right? We've looked at sets without minifigures versus sets with minifigure in 2025, and we said, okay, what's price per? How's it different? We looked at the CMF case study. The other kind of area that we can get some data is with Pick-a-Brick itself.
Okay.
Right now, unlike the other two areas, what I cannot do is I cannot go back to 2010 and say, well, this is what it was on Pick-a-Brick before, right? So we're kind of stuck in a vacuum here, but it's to get a good idea. So Pick-a-Brick, not perfect, but kind of the best we have, all things considered. So West, I went online to Pick-a-Brick. I created a minifigure in two forms. Number one, the cheapest version of the minifigure that I could create based off of parts available, and the most expensive version of the minifigure that I could create based off parts available. Now, some of this, because it's on an Excel spreadsheet, it's the Pick-a-Brick filtering system's a little wonky. My super fancy way of doing this was just filtering by least expensive piece and then going to the minifigure parts and accessories. So hopefully it works out, but I'm sure there's a hole or two that you could poke in it. But that being said, it should directionally be very accurate and kind of to the point that I'm trying to make. So from a regular standpoint, the cheapest minifigure I could make on Pick-a-Brick was $2.36. And that was for a hair, a head, a torso, and a leg. Then I thought, well, most minifigures don't come with just one hair piece, a head, a torso. They come with some sort of accessory too, right? So then I said, okay, I'll add a shield and a sword, and $2.50 for a shield and 17 cents for a sword, and that put us at $5.03. So then I said, let's make the most expensive minifigure on Pick-a-Brick, and same process, hair, head, torso, legs. That came out to be $19.63. And for the hair and head piece, it was for the hair piece, it was a hat / hair combo dual molded piece, right? $4.06 for that. That was the construction hat with hair. Technically, this is where you kind of get into the weeds a little bit, but for the head, it was the werewolf head. Now, any astute listener may know that head / hat combo doesn't actually work. You can't put that hat on a werewolf, but that piece was $4.69. The next closest was like $3. So it's still, the point is still just, right?
Yeah.
For the torso, I had a $3.03 torso with the police, and I don't know what it's technically called, but it was the padded kind of armed torsos from that police training academy set with the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then for the legs, it was just a pair of dual molded legs, just two colors for $3.09. And then again, when you start adding in accessories, 2 accessories, one for each arm. The most expensive was a shield, and the second most expensive was a guitar at $2.26. So in total, if you add in those accessories, we're talking about a $19 minifigure. Insane. So the idea of the price of the minifigure kind of going up over time, and again, the issue with this is what we do not have is a history of Pick-a-Brick and prices, right? That would really put a lot of this to rest, I think, but we can't go back to like 2018, et cetera, and see where those prices were coming in. So what's your reaction to that?
I mean, it's challenging. And as I'm hearing you talk through this, I wonder, the utility of using Pick-a-Brick is challenging because they're selling all of this on the secondary market on top of the sales that they would be getting from regular Lego sets. So you would imagine that, for example, if you built out a set on Pick-a-Brick, let's say you had the same sets, one you bought complete from Lego and one you bought off of Pick-a-Brick, just buying all the pieces for that set on Pick-a-Brick. I mean, here's an interesting question, but I would imagine my hypothesis is Pick-a-Brick would be more expensive for Lego.
Mm-hmm.
And my rationale for that is that Lego is going to upcharge an individual piece more than they would upcharge that piece had it been put into a set. And so because
Or same result but just different action, or they're going to bundle the pieces in a set, right?
right,
And say you're buying all of these, you're buying 1,000 pieces at once, therefore it's going to be cheaper. So the question becomes, is the Pick-a-Brick price the correct price, or is it a upcharge price? But yes,
right.
either
Is
way.
it a good metric for that? Now, on its own, it offers us a decent metric of scarcity, right? The cheaper the piece, ostensibly, the less scarce it is in the overall system. So
Or
your more
easier to
expensive
produce.
pieces are going to be the ones that are harder to mold, they're more
Mhm.
complicated, or they just don't have a ton of them in stock. And so they're going to price them higher because of that scarcity factor or complexity factor. So on one hand, I think it still is an accurate kind of measurement, but on the other, I don't know how much of that would be padded with the fact that they're trying to now upcharge just the individual sales of pieces. It'd be interesting if you removed, maybe like 20% or something from these values
Oh,
where we
West.
wouldn't.
I did.
Oh, okay.
Oh, oh, okay.
as we're talking through it, right? Exactly. So we're exploring, So that would be my initial take with the Pick-a-Brick discussion is, and then obviously with your most expensive condition, you picked like literally the hyper edge case in this
Yes.
scenario, finding everything that was most expensive, but not necessarily a typical quote unquote minifigure based off of like what you would see in a set by some means. And as we've talked about too in past episodes, I think most recently just a few weeks ago, we acknowledge that because Lego prices things kind of on a $5 increment, typically, not always, but typically, there are probably conditions where something rolls in at $17 would be the ideal price, and they either lower it to 15 or put it at 20, for example. And so I'm sure with minifigures, right, if we're assuming that $5 is the average cost of a minifigure, we're going to get instances where they're higher and lower. So that doesn't surprise me necessarily.
So, West, let's take 20% off of 5. That's $4. Now, I'd like to remind you, because this is, and folks, this is West's first time actually seeing any of this data. We kept that intentional because I wanted his gut take reaction. But when I went through this process of assembling a minifigure, I'm talking the head that it was chosen was a smiley face head. It was a brown piece of hair. It was a blank torso and blank legs to get to that $5. So if we start to factor in licensed minifigures, right? And then the desire of every AFOL out there to have printed arms, printed legs, a specialized face, a specialized helmet mold, a oh god, pauldron. Thank you. I almost blanked on the word. A specialized blaster piece. Right. All of a sudden, getting up to this $20 range is, I mean, somewhere between 5 and 20. Right. If we
Yeah.
start to add on these layers, because the other issue with Pick-a-Brick is we can't get, in most cases, those pieces, those licensed figured pieces from Pick-a-Brick. I believe they had the ring wraith torso from the the
Gift with purchase.
Fell Beast gift with purchase, and it was like $4 or something like that back in the day, right? And originally I was like, that's a ripoff, and now I'm like, oh my god, that sold out pretty quick. So my point though is that $4, if you take 20% off, is the absolute low. Like if you got a Lego Star Wars set that had stormtroopers that had no printing and just a white torso and white legs with with a hair piece, that would not be desirable.
Well, and keep in mind too that as we've progressed in this Lego continuum in history, we are seeing more unique and individual minifigures than ever before. And so take, for example, this summer with the clone turbo tank that came out with our first ever Galactic Marines with a price that, is arguably head scratcher at best. Like at worst, is entirely too much. You're talking about brand new minifigures they've never made with new molds, new printing on them. Those minifigures are going to cost Lego a lot of money. Lego's probably at a position where they're like, we'll give you whatever you want. But like there is a cost to it. There is, and we have to start transferring that cost to the consumer because we're no longer sticking to a core set of minifigures. We're specializing them. We get it. We hear you. You want specialized, unique minifigures. We're happy to do that. But if we're going to do that at scale, we're going to have to pass along those costs to some extent.
Yeah, and I mean, Wes, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minifigures in that set, right? It was $159. Now there are 3 battle droids. I'm going to count those as a quarter of a minifigure at this point because, to your point, those are scalable. They have not changed. It's the original Lego Star Wars minifigure in every database. And I think the only thing that's changed since then is the
There's been some
arm
small
direction.
molding changes. Yeah, but you're right. Like it hasn't even gotten a new piece number if I'm not mistaken. So
Nope, it has not. So if we take those 5 minifigures, right, and we add $5 to each of them, that $160 threshold is now down to $125. Right? If we say those 3 battle droids are worth $5 a piece, it's now $120 for that Juggernaut. Now that still seems expensive, but to your point, we have a brand new printed backpack, headpiece, right, a new mold, etc. That and a highly desirable minifigure. So if we just look at the werewolf, for example, that werewolf head, that werewolf helmet, because the ghost piece, for example, on Pick a Brick was $4. So if we say that really specialized helmet / headpiece is $4, then we gotta add another couple dollars to that minifigure count, and we're easily getting down to 100. So
yeah.
And again, it's not to say that the math is perfect every time. Again, there could be licensing stuff that's put onto this, but there's something here, right?
And I don't buy the licensing fee argument too much, because if there was a licensing fee, it would stand to reason it's probably a flat rate across every single set. It would be odd for them to increase the licensing fee for the Death Star. I would imagine it's something like 2% or 5% of the set's total value is a licensing fee or something like that. And so, but why I bring that up is when we see things like the MIDI scale spaceships, for example, that are at a better price per part ratio. How do you explain that compared to, right, like something like the clone turbo tank where the price per part ratio is terrible? And someone's like, well, it's a licensing fee. It's Star Wars. There's licensing fees. And you're like, okay, first off, it's not an unfair argument to make that there's licensing fees, but the cost that you're attributing that licensing fee to isn't consistent across the entire range. So we need to be consistent when we talk about things like licensing fees and acknowledge that, again, they're most likely a flat rate or a flat percentage based off of the set. And it's probably relatively small. I mean, Lego wouldn't allow, Lego still needs to make a profit margin. So it's probably something like 2% or 5%, I think would be reasonable, 2 to 5% of the sale price that would maybe go, or even less, right? Again, it's a symbiotic relationship between Disney and Lego. So there's going to be some maneuver room for Lego if there truly is a licensing fee to kind of argue that it should be as minimal as possible, because Lego at this point is basically selling Disney toys at a scale that Disney can't produce on their own. So it's not like Lego has to compete against, meaningful counterparts. They've been doing this for Lego Star Wars for the last 2 decades, right? Like, what are they going to do? Leave Lego? That would be unheard of.
I mean, there's probably probably 5 to 10%, to be honest, would be reasonable for licensing fee, but we haven't necessarily seen it in the price to part ratio when we looked at that in that original episode. When we looked at it across themes, I mean, it was kind of there, but it was more correlation versus causation. And you'd have to also think that Lego would also be willing to eat some of that cost themselves, because they know the reason they're doing the licensing is because I'm going to sell 10 of these sets for every one of the other sets, right? So you can look at everything at an absolute percentage, but sometimes dollars in the bank is dollars in the bank, right? So
and also city sets have just as terrible price to part ratios sometimes too, and there's no
if not
licensing fee on
worse.
a city set.
Yeah.
Right. So how does that stack up as an argument to be like it's more expensive? There's licensing fees when non-licensed Lego can be just as expensive.
So I think you'd agree it's the minifigures. Also, licensing fees it's probably not changing over time. I mean, it could be, but if you think about where Star Wars is as an IP right now, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 was probably the peak of it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe get into 2020 and 21 with some of the Mandalorian stuff that was going on and kind of some of the Disney Plus excitement, but 2025 is not a great year for Star Wars in general, right? I mean, there's a lot of Star Wars fatigue out there, so they're not upcharging necessarily unless they're trying to milk this for everything that they can, but which they could be. But the
who
bigger
knows how
story
often?
is the minifigures.
Who knows how often too that they renegotiate those licensing fees?
Right.
Is it on a
Right.
5-year cycle? Is it a 10-year cycle? For somebody like Lego, I'm sure they'd want it as long as they can if the fee works in their favor. But you'd have to think that back in 1999, or ostensibly earlier than that, when they agreed to their original licensing fee, so maybe 97, 98, I'm sure Star Wars was just coming online again for the first time. They probably didn't know what they had quite yet. And Lego also didn't quite know what they had just yet. And so I imagine the licensing fee was, I don't know. I don't, again, it's speculation at this point. So.
Oh, George Lucas knew what he had with Star Wars back in 1999. Don't that what they made more money off of merchandise than that first movie by like tenfold, and it all ended up in a landfill somewhere. So they might have had more negotiation power after that, but not that original one. But we digress. So West, to kind of put a bow on this whole minifigure thing, because to your point, right, some of those command ship mini scale ships have great price to part ratios. Some of them don't, some of them do, but the biggest difference is minifigures in my mind, right? And where there's minifigures and where there's not. So what I did is I went back in time from 2010 to 2024, and I did the same process of finding the average price, the price per part ratio, et cetera, and then kind of putting the price part ratio of the sets without minifigures on that price count with sets with piece count with that did not have minifigures, and kind of expanding it that way and looking at the difference. 2010 to 2012 to 2014, very consistent. About $1.60. 1 year it went slightly negative, but 2014 ended at $1.60 as well. So it really kind of was in this dollar, we'll call it a $1.50 range for those
average
years.
Of the non-minifigure set,
correct,
compared
that
to
kind
the
of
average of the adjusted sets with minifigures to get them to that non-minifigure point. The difference was $1.60.
No, so when we did that initial math, we took that difference and then we divided it by the number of minifigures in the set to come up with a price per minifigure as a difference.
I see.
So in the earlier example, the difference in the price was about $20, and then there was 4 minifigures. So we said, okay, 20 divided by 4 is 5.
Yeah.
So in this case, because it's across the board, right? Some sets have 2 minifigures, some have 3, some have 18, right? So on average, what we're saying is that price per minifigure difference between the set price and the price without minifigures and the set price with minifigures was $1.66.
I see. Okay.
And for those first 5 years, that 5-year period from 2010, it was about $1.50 on average.
Okay.
Then in 2015, we get into the 2 to 4 range.
Interesting.
I'd even say 2015 to 2017, it's kind of a $2 to $3 range is more of a distinct tier. And then in 2018, you could say to now you get into this 4 to 5 plus range. Now there's a little bit of shenanigans going on in 2020, 2021. I want to just call that out and be transparent about it. I looked into that. So 2020, the math has us at $12 a minifigure. 2022, it also has us at $12 a minifigure. There were a lot of Mario sets during that time period. I just removed like 3 of them, and I'm talking about like the packs where you had, and Mario had no minifigures, right? None, period. But they did not have good price to part ratios because they had the Mario, the electronic Mario figure in it, right?
Right.
And some of these packs are like the like little sleeve shirt that you could get for $10, and it was like 2 pieces. I did not remove those, and I should have. But I digress. We're here. When I removed those, just quickly, and I'm not doing it right now because this is on the fly, and I want to make sure I do a good pass at it. It already dropped it by $3. So there's other stuff that's still in there, but the point still stands. You get to this what I'd call $5 to $7 range of a minifigure price after 2018.
Yeah.
And
And
when we first started, yep.
I'd be curious to see if you were to chart on another graph or just another data set of the number of unique minifigures by year, and then correlate that, or not correlate that, but compare it to your chart of average minifigure cost per year. If we'd start to see noticeable increases where you mentioned that prices start to jump. And I would imagine
unfortunately, there's no good way to find unique minifigures per year.
Yeah,
there's no data because all the database has it as just the database has just a minifigure, right? They don't count it as unique.
Yeah.
But I like where your head's at, because I think that would be the next layer, right? Because we're talking about how scarcity and scalability affect things like price, right? So when we first started talking, we talked about the price of the collectible minifigure series over time. And I said, when I looked at this initially, and when I first started out, I said, there's no way it's that simple. And I just would like to remind you of the CMF prices. In 2010, it was $2. 2011 to 2014, it was $3. In 2014 to 2019, it was $4. And in 2019 to 2025, it has been $5. And originally, my hypothesis
maybe it is just
was
that simple.
yeah, I was like, there's so much more that goes into the CMFs than that, right? It's the Lego's counting on people to buy multiples, right? Because it's a blind bag system. So therefore, if there's a series of 12 for everybody who has a full series of 12, they probably bought 14 or 18 of them, right? Or for when it was 16, they probably bought 20 of them or whatever, right? Higher fidelity minifigure, right? More leg printing, etc. This is the highest of the market minifigures, so maybe that's where some of that's made up for. But at the end of the day, it is almost that simple to just say, and I'll go back to the kind of value over time based off that calculation I had. 2010, $1.66. CMFs in 2010, $1.99. Then we said that 2010 to 2014 range, we'll call it about $1.50 range. So right under this for the CMFs, they had them at $1.99 to $2.99, right? We talked about how maybe the CMFs have lost a little bit of their punch over time and were just not as collectible potentially as they were. I mean, I don't know. I feel like personally there's a little bit of fatigue there. I don't know about you, West, but there's certainly not as much excitement.
I bought any.
Yeah, they don't get talked about that much. Or you buy 1 or 2 of them just because you're like, oh, what the hell? I got $5. So then 2014 to 2019, we get this next jump. Again, when we look at the data, I saw it in 2015. So again, this is some like Grinch math. So this is directionally is awesome if we can even get close. 2015 to 2017, we saw that next jump, right? And even into 2018. And then 2019 and beyond, we saw the final jump. And guess what? 2019 and beyond, we saw a final jump to $5. So
right there.
Am I wrong?
Occam's
or
razor.
am I wrong? Yeah. The simplest explanation is most oftenly the correct explanation.
I mean, I think this is a good hypothesis, Grinch, and I think, you started unpacking it with the minifigure vending machine set, and now we've compared it to CMF. We've compared it to historical data. I think it's really fair to assume one of the things that I like about Jang's reviews that he does sometimes is he goes through it and he does this a lot with like the Jurassic Park sets, for example, and he'll say, he's like, the vehicle here, it's roughly $20, and then he'll look at the dinosaur, and he's like, the dinosaur, that's roughly $10, and two minifigures, $10. So $50 for the set doesn't seem too unreasonable when you think about it. And it feels like he's just kind of doing back of the napkin math, and it's very subjective. But here you provide a more objective approach to this where you're literally able to quantify it and say, okay, these minifigures are probably worth $5. Maybe if they're exclusive, maybe up to like 6 or 7. But you got to be at Death Star scales of minifigures before that really starts to make a noticeable difference. So you call it $5. Great. Remove $5 from everything. Is the price per part ratio now consistent or with that basically $10 or 10 cent or 11 cent price per part ratio that we have found over time? Oh, it is? Okay, great. Now that makes sense why this set is more expensive. And so, like we mentioned, as Lego is making more unique minifigures and scarcer minifigures and is increasing the variety of minifigure, they're doing so at the expense of something else. And so it makes sense that Lego would start sort of incorporating that into its pricing scheme as the complexity of the minifigure has increased. Whereas before, when it was just just molding red torsos or green torsos or whatever, that's a lot easier to do than having to mold those like phantom legs and robot arms or robot legs or the legs with the claws on them, or they have all of these different pieces to minifigures now where it definitely changes how they'd have to approach pricing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one thing that I think is terribly frustrating or terribly good for the data actually is that if you look at the average number of minifigures per set over, and this goes by, this I've got back to 1999. It's just the pricing part gets a little wonky when you go that far back. So that's why I just did it back to 2010. But even if we go back to 2010, the average minifigures per set is somewhere between mid 3.5 and high 3.
Yeah.
Has not substantially changed. There's years where it's slightly below that middle point, and there's years where it's slightly above. So I looked at the median as well. It's 3. There is 1 year, that's 2016, where it's 2, and that last year is that it was 2 before that was 2012. And then before that, you go all the way back to 2005. It is 3.
Yeah.
The median number of minifigures is 3. Where you see the difference when you look at like pure minifigure count, the number of sets with more minifigures does get higher, right? That bell curve starts to spread out a little bit, but there's always more sets on the lower end of the bell curve to balance out higher number sets, right? And so I say it's frustrating or I say it's good because it's kind of like a non-factor, but at the same time, what that tells you that is that it's consistent in the data. So it is not necessarily an issue of, hey, there's more minifigures in every single set and therefore it's more expensive. What we're seeing is for every tropical aquarium that's got a close to, I guess, perfect part to part price to part ratio, there's a vending machine, a minifigure vending machine that balances it out, right?
Yeah. And also, too, going back to the complexity piece, it's not just the minifigure. There's something that data tells us it's not the minifigure. There's something more at play. And that could be, again, complexity
it's not
of the
just
molding.
The number of minifigures.
Right. Right, exactly. But think back to 2010. How many times did you get a set in 2010 where maybe you had a printed torso on a minifigure, but it had just unprinted legs? I mean, that was a kind of a key staple in a lot of the Marvel sets up until the 2020s. Was even on higher end Marvel sets, Thor usually just had like blue legs, and Black Panther just had black legs. You didn't get a full printed Black Panther minifigure
Iron Man was
at
really the
all.
only one that had printed legs.
Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense that as these figures have become more complex individually, that again, it's accounted for in the price. And think about back then too, that was a common call for Lego fans, adult fans of Lego, of like, we want more printed figures, we want more complicated figures, and we got it. Right, that we got that from Lego. It's just at the expense of, we'll give that to you,
Price.
but it's going to cost. So, and we've
Yeah.
seen Lego slowly shift into that model, and I think people enjoy it. It's just, you want to get the clone turbo tank, great. The Galactic Marines are going to cost you, like, we'd love to make Galactic Marines. It's just going to cost you some money because it's going to be this set and maybe a advent calendar or something in the future. And the bin that we're putting all the Galactic Marine torsos and heads and masks into, headpieces into, is going to come at the expense of something else. So that's fine. It's just going to cost you extra money. Like, so
Be careful what you wish for. So,
yeah.
West, I leave you with this. It is that simple if you look at the CMFs over time. and if you think about it, if that's kind of the leading factor, right, of Lego saying, hey, how much can we get away for charging for an individual minifigure? And then a few years after that, you start to see, okay, well, right now we've got these priced at maybe $1 internally. So with these CMS, we got to do them at $2 because they're a little bit more expensive to make. People are buying multiple of them, so we don't have to go all the way. And then, oh, cool. Okay, well, wait a second. People value these minifigures a lot more than we think they do. And then what? In 2019, they acquire Bricklink, right? Maybe it was 2021 they acquired Bricklink. And all of a sudden, they're like,
Yeah.
holy crap. People really like these minifigures. And it's, for some people that are listening, they might be like, yeah, duh, everybody loves minifigures. But for a $1 billion company, what they're waiting for is the tangible data to make some of these decisions, right? And you
Yeah.
have that
If they're
with
going
the
to pivot,
CMFs, you have it with the acquisition of Bricklink. So you get that real firm data that you need to go and make some of these potentially million or $1 billion decisions for your brand.
yeah. I mean, again, right, just to back what I said, this has to come at the expense of something else for Lego. So if Lego's going to do it, they need to make sure it's worth their while. And like you said, it's through the acquisition of Bricklink, being able to onboard that data in real time to see not only, they have the sales figure, so they're going to know if a set performs well, but to then see on the back end that not only is it the set that performs well, specifically it's the minifigures in the set that is performing well. It validates that hunch or notion that they probably have had for the last 10 years anyways, of, hey, we think these minifigures are a lot more collectible than we originally thought. Let's figure this out. So let's lean into that.
Brick mail. All right. So, West, after all that analysis by paralysis, how about some nice brick mail to wash it all down? So, why don't you take us away with the first one?
Let's do it. Our first brick mail is from Ben, who writes in, hope you guys are doing well. New listener here. I recently took a new job with a 30-minute commute and started looking for podcasts to make the drive more enjoyable. Stumbling upon you guys has been a surprise and a delight. I'm a relatively new AFOL who also had a dark age. I grew up in the 90s and 2000s playing Lego with my dad. He got me the mini Hogwarts set, amazing, as a Christmas gift about 3 years ago, and I've been collecting and building more and more ever since. My favorite part of the hobby is building sets tied to places I've visited and then displaying them with a photo from the trip in front of the build. I just did this with the Hobbiton and Barad-dûr after hiking the Tongariro crossing. I've been working through your past episodes, and they've definitely had me adding items to my Lego cart, hoping to time a good gift with purchase or 2 times ports before hitting buy now.
I really enjoy the topic and guests you bring onto the show. Discovering Bricka and Fabu has been a great way to get more involved in the community. And I never really understood Bricklink before, and now I have the sushi restaurant set ready to order in a few days. Thank you guys for making this content. It has genuinely brought some smiles during rough times and long drives. As a supply chain professional, I've always been fascinated by LEGO's supply chain sequencing, forecasting, assembly, end-of-line testing. It's such an incredible machine. I've noticed their COO recently hit 25 years at LEGO. Have you guys ever considered doing an episode on their supply chain and or tooling and molds? If anyone could research and break that down with insight and wisdom, it'd be you guys. Looking forward to this week's episode. Cheers, Ben.
It's not a bad idea. I'd love to do a supply chain episode. I just don't know how much is actually out there. So let us do our research on it and make sure we do the due diligence that we need to on the topic. But we'll add it to the list because I love the idea. And we're certainly glad that you have found a place of enjoyment in the podcast here, and have enjoyed it through all of your trips through New Zealand. And I believe, I don't remember what was filmed at the Tongariro crossing, but I imagine that you also saw a bunch of cool spots from Middle Earth. So I just can't remember off the top of my head what was filmed there. So, and I guess we're sorry or not sorry that your wallet is now spending more on Lego, because we're
but
here
efficiently
to talk about it. But glad that you
are getting different
yes.
purchases. And
there you go. And 2 times points.
Rather
there
than
you go.
Just willy-nilly buying Lego sets, right? So
That's right.
Some AFOL math there for you. Really, you're making money is what my wife would tell me through girl math. So,
All right. So up next, we have one from Daniel Ziegel, who writes, "The Wizard's Tower is back. I've leveled up the colors and made the minifigures much more fantasy D&D themed. What do y'all think? If you haven't seen it yet, I'd appreciate it." So, and then he highlights some of the play features. Some of the play features include fully enclosed models with foldable dollhouse design that opens in the back, an enchanted tree at the base of the model, twist knob reveals a creature, guardian statue, secret cave entrance, hidden sliding wall. Thank you, Daniel. So I did check it out. It looks really good. There's a lot more pop and color. I noticed that the wizard, I think, is using the Statue of Liberty torso, which I think is kind of funny. The tree definitely feels more distinct, and I did like the hat piece kind of at the top there, at the top of the tower for the wizard top. And then I think the minifigures definitely have a lot more character in them. So I'd say good job, and would encourage all the listeners to go check out the Wizard's Tower on Bricklink Designer Program.
Yeah,
and
we will link it
10.
in our show announcement.
And that is a wrap of another episode of AFOLs Welcome. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening to the show. If you'd like to write the podcast, please email us at afolswelcome@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at AFOLsWelcome. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.
See ya.